get us started and going to invite Ann Bird, President and Partner of CTQ, to bring greetings to everybody.
Well, good evening, everyone. I fully anticipate we will continue to have folks who are joining us here, and I am so delighted to be here this evening to be part of this webinar, because the presenters are two of my favorite people in the world, and we are thrilled to have Christopher Cole with us. Chris was an amazing staff member with CTQ for a number of years, and he was inspired to go back into the classroom after becoming a board certified teacher, and just could not be more proud of the work he is continuing to do every day with some very, very fortunate students and colleagues with whom he gets to work. So I'm delighted that you all who do not know Christopher will get to learn a lot more about just how special he is in the next hour. And Shannon Sidabaka has been an amazing supporter and leader for CTQ for a number of years. We are delighted that she was the first educator to serve as chair of CTQ's board of directors, and she did so splendidly for what, Shannon, 92, 93 years, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was. About the time the link.
We didn't want to let her go, just as we did not wish to let Christopher go. And so we kept talking about the transition, and Shannon was so gracious to continue to serve us well for so many years. But you guys have two amazing educators who are lifelong learners and leaders who are going to walk us through a very timely session this evening around what we're all learning and what we're all dealing with around crisis management and the crisis learning mode we find ourselves in now. And so Christopher and Shannon, I know for you all too, you're being joined by a number of amazing educators. It's great to see quite a few CTQ friends here among the attendees at this point. So we're looking forward to learning from and with you over the next hour. And Lori, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Lori Nazarino. I'm a staff member, former educator, staff member at CTQ. Just a quick reminder to folks to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Feel free to unmute when you do want to speak, but keeping your microphone muted helps eliminate some background noise. I'm super interested to hear what Christopher and Shannon have to say, given that the whole COVID-19 thing is live and active and changing hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. And certainly the implications for education are huge. Before I hand it over to them, just a real quick overview of CTQ. In our work, we seek to inform, inspire, and innovate educators to create a system that works better for all students. We inform the fields based on research and best practice, and most importantly, based on the real lived experiences of educators, which is why Christopher and Shannon are leading the session and not those of us who are former educators. That's how we inform the field. And then sessions like this and others that are led by practicing educators and inspired by practicing educators help to inspire the field in what's possible, because most, if not everything that we're trying to do to redesign the system is being done somewhere. And so we seek to inspire the field. And then we work with partners across the education spectrum, whether it's other nonprofit organizations, unions, schools, districts, and state agencies, for the folks who are ready to engage in the innovative work of redesigning the education system for all students. So with that said, and that being the very briefest of overviews of what CTQ does, I'm gonna hand this over to Christopher and Shannon so that they can engage us in the conversation about what the heck are we gonna do with what's going on in the world now, and how can we redesign the system in a way that works better. Christopher and Shannon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to jump right in. There's so much to talk about, and more than anything, I'm interested in getting some ideas out there in terms of setting the stage in the context of where we are and where we're going. And then really I'm here to engage with you all to find out what comes next. We're at a really pivotal moment in public education, a transformative time, and it can go a few different directions. And so I want to find out what we can do together to make sure it goes in the direction that we all think it should go in. And so hopefully at least half of our time together is open discussion and conversation around some big questions that are going to take a lot of bright minds, and we've got all the right minds, as far as I can tell, in the virtual room right now. So looking forward to the conversation, and I'll kind of zip through some initial thoughts, very few of which are my own. Mostly I'm just collecting what is already out there. This was a really cathartic prep experience for me. I have been, I don't know, like if this resonates with you, but feeling like every day and every week brings new anxieties and stresses at a home personal level in terms of managing my own household and teaching from home, but also the ever-changing dynamics of what's happening for my school, my district, and especially my students and their families. So to be able to step back from the nitty-gritty of that and get a big picture view has been very helpful for me. And so I just look forward to sharing those reflections with you all and getting a sense of your own experience from the last about month and a half or 2 months, which has been wild. So let's go for it, Lori. I'll give an overview of the agenda real quick. My history with CTQ started, 12 years ago on a teacher solutions team around teacher working conditions and what it would take to transform teaching and learning for students and families. That turned into some consultant work and then a full-time position from 2010 to 2018. And during those years, I also worked with CTQ's support and encouragement toward board certification, and then ultimately decided to go back to the classroom, which is where I've been for the past 2 years, teaching 6th grade to students in Irvine, California. So real quick, we're going to go over where we are now, zoom in on kind of the micro perspective, kind of what things will look like for schools. We're going to zoom out and think about what things are going to look like for public education in general, and then look toward the future. Do we go forward and reinvent public education, or does this wind up putting us back to where we were before? A combination of the two, we'll see. And then, like I said, I'm here for the reflection, the reinvention questions, and sharing some space with you all to think about what comes next.
And I'm gonna highlight this right now at the very beginning as we're where we are now, and I'll get back to it at the end again. But I want to tell you that after conversations with administrators and state leaders and some various policymakers, they're looking for ideas. They don't know how deep this water is. And so I'm going to encourage everybody that you know, and you especially, and everybody that you know, to be in constant contact with policymakers and administrators and highlight what you think should happen in education, and be a constant thorn, if you want, or just a constant nudge for these folks, because as they look for ideas, teachers need a seat at this table. And the only way that we're going to get a consistent seat at the table in order to make these changes happen is if you're a constant presence in their social media viewing, email, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, whatever you've got, to make sure you're sharing your stories and that you're sharing them with media. Local media are always looking for stories, but absolutely, you have something that worked, make sure that everybody knows what you're doing and your frustrations as well, so that you have a seat at the table. And I'll come back to that again at the end as well. Chris?
All righty. So I wanted to start with kind of orienting us. This is a piece, and I'll post the link right now, from a leading epidemiologist at Harvard, who talks about, this was written at the beginning of April. We're now at the beginning of May. We are just getting into the life raft. Dry land is really far away. We are at the sort of end of the beginning, and we have a very long time to go. Part of the anxiety, I know, for myself and for my colleagues has been the absence of any known timeline for Initially we were doing emergency distance learning for 2 weeks. We were going to have spring break, and then we were going to magically be back. That never happened. And probably similar experiences regardless of where you are in the country. And each, every week, every month brings a new vision for, we'll be back mid-May, we'll be back in the fall. Now it's, we're going to maybe come back with distance learning, maybe come back with a hybrid model. So the reality is we are likely in this uncomfortable space for at least 18 months, which is the shortest amount of time that realistically a vaccine could be developed. And that's kind of on the early end. The alternative is that 2/3 of 320 million Americans develop immunity by either a vaccine or getting the disease. And that's also not going to be a short amount of time. So we aren't in this for weeks or months. We are in this for months and years. So orienting our time frame around how long this is going to take, yes, a miracle could happen. There might be a breakthrough, but realistically, we are looking at a 2020, 2021 school year that is very different from anything we've ever experienced before. Once we can kind of orient ourselves toward this being a new normal, I think it can help us step back and say, okay, we're not doing this for a brief period of time. What do we do? What does this look like? And so in an immediate sense, when schools do reopen in some capacity, right now there are kind of 9 different visions for what that's going to look like. Next slide, Lori. The first one we can all is obvious. We're going to have stepped up health and hygiene measures. There's going to be hand sanitizer on every table. We're going to be washing our hands every hour, yada, yada, yada. That one I think is obvious. As we go down this list, kind of the adjustments become a bit more extreme. And I think number 2 is really tough for us all to imagine, but class sizes of 12 or fewer as an effort to kind of keep groups small and socially distance. That's going to be a tremendous shift. But that's what public health experts are recommending for if we do have to come together, it needs to be in relatively small groups. Schools are not places that are accustomed to really putting students together in small groups. At least at a minimum, 30 kids in a class. If you're in a high school, up to 40 or 50. And so there's going to be a lot of transformation in terms of what school days look like when we're trying to get students into smaller groups. That might take the form of staggered schedules, hybrids where you have a group A and a group B that come in the morning and the afternoon, and maybe those times shift over the course of a week. There's been some talk as well that earlier grades might be easier to go first in terms of returning to schools because those are one group of students with one teacher all day, and so it's easier to manage and create smaller groups, smaller interactions. Also smaller facilities with a few hundred students as opposed to many high schools that are a few thousand students. So that's one idea. New calendars could mean that we have shorter school days but longer school years. We have a 11-month school year instead of a 9 or a 10-month, so that again, we have fewer students on campus at a time. Very different attendance policies in terms of if you're attending school online, what does it mean to attend? What do you have to do to demonstrate attendance? I know here in California, attendance has been relaxed completely. They are assuming every kid is signing on every day. We know realistically that that's not true. About 20% of students are not being contacted or are not reaching out and connecting with their teachers on a regular basis. As I can imagine, that is in the more vulnerable communities. So that's going to lead to a widening of the achievement gap between those who have and those who don't have. No assemblies, no sports, no parent-teacher conferences, no gatherings of large people. That's difficult to wrap my head around at an elementary school where those are kind of the community building aspects of school. It feels really transactional right now with my students. We've got X amount of hours per day where we can get certain reading and math goals accomplished. And we try to do some community building stuff, but a lot of the sort of non-essential stuff maybe that makes school what it is for students and draws them in are going to be the kinds of things that aren't available. Remote learning will continue. And this last one, I think, is perhaps the sneakiest one because we don't know how this is going to hit yet. But there are 56 million students in public education right now. And mental health experts estimate that each one of those kids has experienced through this whole epidemic an adverse childhood experience on the level of losing a parent, mom and dad getting divorced, losing a friend. This is that level of extreme for most, if not all, students. They've been ripped from their social circles at ages where life is the social circle. And there's only so much that can be accomplished by text message and social media. And so social emotional learning and the kind of the practical day-to-day help that students are going to need. We are accustomed to providing a level of that in schools, and now that may be the higher priority as we emerge from kind of this stage of the epidemic. So each one of those shifts would be significant in its own right. But if you imagine kind of stacking several of these on top of each other, then I think this model for managing complex change really hits home in terms of what, we've probably all felt each of these aspects as we've made the transition from traditional teaching to distance learning. I'm not sure about where you are, but there wasn't an action plan really for this. In my district, we tried, 3 or 4 days of planning and everyone did their best. And so in the absence of that action plan, we've had false starts, we've had miscommunication, we've had people going in all different directions. We've also, while resources do exist, we didn't have the resources at home for some of us in terms of high-speed internet access. Our students didn't necessarily have the resources to make this transition as immediately as it needed to happen. And so that's led to frustration for parents, families, teachers, administrators. The incentives, what are the incentives? For a lot of students, their incentive to go to school is to see their friends. And the absence of that for them, well, what's the incentive for me to go to school right now? What's the incentive for me to sign on when I've got video games, Netflix, and everything else that's entertaining right next to it? And if the grading policy in my district right now is pass, fail, or your grade can only get better during this time, the incentive structures right now are really out of alignment with what students and teachers and districts have experienced in the past. And so there's been some resistance, there's certainly been some anxiety. We also threw this at teachers without necessarily knowing they had the skills to move from a face-to-face environment to a virtual one. I have led communities of teachers for years in online communities. I felt like I had the skills until I didn't realize how much data I picked up just interacting in the classroom and seeing students from across the room and their body language and knowing I'm saying something and the way that you're sitting in your chair demonstrates to me that you're not getting this. So I'm gonna walk over and we're gonna sort this out. I don't have any of that right now. No teacher has that. And so skills we may have thought we had or may have thought would be easy to acquire have certainly been, we've been learning on the fly. And so that's led to some anxiety for teachers. And then the vision, what is the vision? How long does this last? Is this emergency distance learning or is this a fairly new normal that's going to last for at least the whole school year and maybe beyond that? So I've just outlined the one shift we've had from traditional to emergency distance learning. We click back a slide and we can think about if we have 9 of those shifts or 4 of those shifts or any combination of those shifts, we have 8-dimensional complexity for that model, and we're going to be doing that all at once, and we're probably going to be doing it primarily virtually, so not with human face-to-face body language interaction. And so the complexities that we've encountered already are only going to be accelerated and magnified as we get deeper into this. And as we try to bring some version of normalcy back to public education and for students, realistically, it is not going to get easier. It is most likely going to get more complicated. Primarily because on top of all this, there's a public health emergency, and there's what happens then if a student has it. How long are they out of school? A family gets it. You know, what are the policies that are going to be in place for when the illness is brought into the school community? Not quite the hopeful note in terms of where we're going at a micro level. So let's zoom out a little bit and think about what are the macro implications, which again can go both ways. We will have instability in the system of higher education, which will have a downstream impact on K-12 education. There are already schools and universities that have said we can't recover from this. We won't be able to open our doors in the fall. We're done. And that's what, a month and a half into this. We know, what if 6 months in, 12 months in, schools that relied on students living on campus, international students, that revenue is no longer going to be there. They're going to maybe try to translate what students experienced in person to an online education. But for students, that's, why would I still pay $50,000 a year for X university if I'm only taking online classes and not quite getting that same experience? And so how does that revenue model change for them? And what then are those downstream impacts for K-12 education? On top of that, there will be a shortage of new teachers in the coming years because teachers in training right now aren't going to be able to get their in-person practicum experience. So that's on top of a period of time where we've already had shortages in the teaching profession. Separate from that, we have the tension now between the public really getting a good, perhaps too good of a view of, wow, teachers have been doing some amazing work behind the scenes that I have not been aware of. And I'm at home trying to homeschool, trying to do my own work. And, parents are now realizing they had a good thing going when kids got to leave for 6-8 hours a day and, come back better educated in some ways. Now parents are realizing what teachers are doing, and not only in an academic sense. They're realizing what school stood for their children, what services were provided beyond learning. There's a great clip, I'll share it later, of the NEA president talking about all the things that teachers do. And then at the very end, it's like, and then we teach them how to read, write, and do math. So I didn't want to take us away, but I do want, that's a good clip for us all to see what parents are realizing now in terms of what teachers have been doing. And then we heard already from Tricia before things really got rolling here about, in Ohio, we already know that there's going to be a $300 million deficit. Again, we're 6 weeks, 8 weeks into this, and we already know we're going to have these gaping holes at all levels of government and public education. Enhanced respect for what teachers in public education accomplish. At the same time, there's not going to be the funding to support any additional support, let alone, we're going to be experiencing significant cuts on, beyond probably the levels that we experienced back in 2008. Just in terms of, the size of the hole that's been blown in the economy is already in striking distance of what we experienced back then. It's not all bad though, guys.
No, there's some hopeful news in terms of the funding issues. In terms of, it's going to be a big belt tightening for everybody, but it's forced us to look at redundancy within the system that supports children, which includes the social service networks, feeding kids outside of school and inside school, and also assistance for students outside of the actual school day or outside of the school building. And so some agencies that have limited funding as well and will experience some cuts are saying, what if we really pare this down and we ask our funders, if we modify our funding to provide safe centers for students to come in small groups to receive one-on-one instruction. And we have, we hire staff to do that. They might not be certified teachers, but they would be homework or assistance centers, but they would also be providing some of the social and emotional learning collaborative with the student, with the schools. So we're having opportunities to talk to people in other spheres of student support that have never come to the table and really talk to schools about how we can do this together. And so I think that the collaborative model that's going to come down the pipeline from other agencies that have been siloed is going to be a positive impact on education. It's going to reduce the strain on schools because we've tried to be all things to all people. And so bringing in partners to assist us, particularly in funding those efforts that we have not had the time or the funding to really do adequately. I mean, we've done an amazing job with what we had, but that's going to help us a little bit. But it's going to require a different communication model between agencies and also between organizations that support kids in almost every community. And so when I said, we want a seat at the table, communities are starting to have these conversations. And these conversations need to take place with people that are actual practitioners that understand the needs of students and understand the needs of schools as they emerge from this crisis. What they're going to look like and what they're looking like now, to have a clarity of voice that says, these are our needs, these are hills worth dying on, and this is something that we really would like to accomplish, and move forward from there. Chris?
Well said, thank you. So now we're getting to the hopeful part. So this is, this is the crazy terrain we find ourselves in right now. And yet this is perhaps the most pivotal moment in public education that we might see in our lifetimes. People are looking to public education to fill significant needs and gaps that we know students and families are experiencing. And eyes are on public education. Now we've got a chance to demonstrate our solutions and show just exactly what kind of leadership teachers can and will provide. So next slide. These two are going to go quickly. I love this graph because it shows kind of the overlapping, all things happening at once. What's possible if schools use recovery work as a foundation for reinvention. So right now we're still in kind of response mode. We're making sure we reach out to students. Like I mentioned earlier, 20% of them we're not making contact with on a regular basis. 40%, only 40% of teachers are getting engagement with the majority of the students on a daily basis. So we still have a lot of connection to do with students. At the same time, we're getting to a point now where we're seeing what recovery will look like and what reinvention could look like. And as it shows, kind of this is all happening at the same time. So, we kind of know what response mode looks like. We've been in it. So what does recovery look like? Well, recovery is, as Shannon mentioned, forming these coalitions of collaborative groups and stakeholders who have an interest in outcomes for students and families, which right now is just about everyone in the country. They've got a connection to public ed. They didn't realize how much they needed public education until their kids are at home 50 hours a week and they got to try to get their own work done. So strictly in a babysitting sense, they need public education. And obviously on top of that, they need their kids to learn and be prepared for the demands of the 21st century. We in recovery are going to have the significant task of tending to the trauma and loss that students have experienced. At the most basic level, kind of the social loss and the time lost from school, and at the tragic end of family members and perhaps in their own immediate family. This is going to be with us for a while. It's not just the 65,000 some folks who died already, it's the up to 200,000 who are estimated to die over the course of the next 18 months. That's going to touch every student in the country. And so what's the role of the school going to be in, you're not going to make that child whole again, but you're certainly going to do your best to repair and make that child feel safe and comfortable in a school environment so that the student can learn. And then kind of that very bottom layer, the webinar we're in right now, I think, is that that very light blue at the bottom, where we're thinking about reinvention. We're thinking about how can this moment be transformative. You know, folks on this call who are familiar with the work of CTQ and Teaching 2030 and some of those big ideas for where public education could go and what it could look like, see a lot of echoes right now. You know, we've immediately all gone to blended learning overnight. And yeah, there have been some glitches and hiccups, but we've managed it fairly well without the kind of long-term planning and training that might have been ideal. We've made it happen overnight because teachers are amazing professionals and they're flexible and versatile and, you know, all the things we already know about public education and teachers. So how do we then capitalize on that? What can reinvention look like? We're going to get to that with you all in about 2 minutes, but I want to go quickly to the next slide and then skip right past it because I don't think this is where we're going. I don't get the sense right now that, hopefully not, at least here and in terms of the teachers I'm engaging with, no one feels like we're going to go back to normal after all this is over. We've seen the best of what teachers can accomplish, and again, the respect that the public now has and recognizing what teachers are doing on a regular basis makes it feel impossible to go back to the status quo, and yet we've got to be cautious that that's where some stakeholders do want to go back to. You know, folks on this call, I don't get the sense want that at all. We have higher aspirations for what we can accomplish as a profession and what students can accomplish in, you know, the kinds of learning environments that we imagine for our future. So this is the best part. We've got about 30 minutes left here. Shannon and I came up with kind of some initial reflecting questions on how do we get from response, recover to reinvent rather than response, recover, return to status quo. And so we really want to use this time to open the floor and hear from you all about some starting questions, but also the questions that you may have come here with or may have come to mind as you've been listening here tonight. So one more slide, Lori, and we can get to the good stuff. I don't think we need to read through these. I don't know if we necessarily want to go through them in order or just see, you know, what piques interest of those who are in the room right now, and then see what kind of conversation we can have around those.
Yeah, if one resonates with you, jump in. But one thing I want to highlight is rather than focus on the speed bumps and the roadblocks that we might get, you know, we know that that teacher education, we don't have enough teachers in the pipeline to fill the needs because we're going to need more teachers as opposed to fewer. Focus on the things that that move us forward. So grab a question and let's start the conversation.
And a quick reminder to remember to unmute yourself, because you can have an awesome conversation all by yourself that we can't hear.
This is Gabe from Virginia Beach. Can you hear me?
Yep, can, Gabe.
Hey, after this ends, do you think there'll be a federal or state or even district-wide initiative or mandate to make sure that everyone is able to hit the ground running if this ever were to happen again?
Gabe, I can tell you that there are 3 states that I know of. New Mexico is one. I believe Washington or Oregon. I can't remember which one is doing it. And then there's, Ann might know which other third one, but they've already got plans in the works, and they've gathered groups of teachers and administrators. And I think they were receiving a little bit of funding from Gates and some from a couple of foundations that I've worked with to do the initial planning for some hybrid learning models, and also some models that that might help. And they don't know. They're each trying different models, and what they're going to do is kind of like a vaccine initiative. Is they're going to see what works and what doesn't work, get together, and they formed a coalition of these 3 states to get together and talk about how things are going, so that they can learn from each other. And maybe, I don't know if it'll produce a federal model, but I have a feeling, Gabe, that this is going to happen at a state-by-state level, mainly because of the chaos that exists in Washington right now over all of this.
And if
But
I may add,
watch
Shannon,
Minnesota and Washington for sure.
and
Go ahead.
Shannon, if I may add to that, I know there are several funders in addition to Gates on the national level who are trying to figure out the best way to leverage some of their investment dollars around what a national conversation needs to look like around being able to respond to the crisis we currently find ourselves in, much more of a proactive mode for, as what Chris has alluded to, will be the next wave to come along, so that we find ourselves much better prepared in ways that we can simply build upon from what we're learning now.
I'm finding myself thinking of drivers and framers. And if we don't know what we want as teachers, I've been looking a lot at some of the reading that's out there. If our drivers SEL, and everything else builds off of those kids feeling safe and ready to learn, then the Carnegie unit has to change. That's a policy thing. The model that we're going to promote, we have to know what's already shifting. Otherwise, I'm envisioning for fall this blended piece that is too much seat time and not enough doing for kids. So you can imagine that we have the check-in, which is a Google form, and the slide deck or the presentation and the worksheet, which then leads to a checkout with another form. And I'm seeing that fly. That's not doing our kids the service we need them to do in terms of critical thinking. So for me, if I had to pick my hills, it would be the 4 C's plus SEL. You can't teach them until they're somewhat comfortable, but then we've got to teach them to think. All this content that we have crammed in forever, this is an opportunity to make it less about memorization and more about doing. I realize I'm speaking middle and high school here.
Okay, Marcia, someone just asked what the 4 C's were.
Creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration. Some people add a 5th C, which is citizenship.
And part of the conversations that I've had recently with folks at state and other levels, you know, above the classroom level, have been on how much can we fit into that bag. And so everything that we've been doing, which is an absolute buffet of stuff for kids over the last, you know, 30 years, has been too much. And so what they're trying to do is ask us, what are the things we need to focus on first? We can always add, you know, to this plan, but what are the things we want to really focus on as we move forward? And it's going to be different for elementary, for primary, middle elementary, junior high, and even high school, or middle schools and even high schools. They're all going to look a little bit different in terms of what we need to provide, but they want to get the system of what it's going to look like so that teachers have some predictability, and we can help teachers develop those tools and skills that they say they need, which they do, in order to be successful in that new environment. That's one question. And the other question that I get asked a whole lot is on the equity side. How do we make sure kids have equal and equitable access to the tools and resources necessary if school isn't just one point in geography, if it's online or blended or what it looks like? How do we make sure that they have equal opportunities to learn? Those are big questions. They're not related to content, but the content, most people are saying that the content is coming secondary to that. But those content conversations have to occur because we have too much content right now.
I caught Lori's question there in the chat window about corporate reform that would prevent the democratizing element. I'd say absolutely. We've been on that corporate reform trajectory. Like momentum and the status quo is moving in that direction. Federal leadership is certainly aligned in that camp, and so I would hate to think that we are going to be fighting some of the same old battles, but they will exist. And not everyone is as like-minded, I think, as those who are on the session right now. Some folks want to use this to just up the ante on privatizing and vouchers and charters and virtual charters with even less accountability. And so it won't be easy. And a lot of people want to use the moment for their own agenda, for better or worse.
I know we're going to face quite a bit in Florida in terms of the push to vouchers and some charter schools. There are some decent charter school advocates that are working towards some really decent models, but they're going to be blended with public education. And I think this is another opportunity for public and private collaboration. And that might be something that comes out of this, where public schools are kind of guiding the conversation. And these charter schools are in the same boat that we are. They're swimming in pretty deep water and looking for a life raft. And public education and the rich resource we have in terms of personnel and experience and crisis management is going to be a very helpful tool for more people than just public education. And so if we miss that opportunity, that'll be an error. I want to make sure that we leave the conversation going so that public school continues to be that equitable access for all kids, but that some of these schools that are having some successes can share those successes with us, or even resources, so that we can move forward. But I worry. I don't want the whole world to go to charter and private because it's easier for people to manage or get their head around. We're losing some advocates in small business. In the corporate world, a lot of the larger corporations have been very, in some cases, adversarial to some of the changes that we've made in education that were very positive for students. And small businesses have always been pretty big advocates. We're going to lose a lot of small businesses, and so we have to make sure we stay in contact with those parents and those small business folks so that they continue to be advocates for education and continue to be advocates for equitable and public education, and don't drive us towards another industrial system.
I have a question. This is Lori Gogren in Brooklyn.
Hi, Lori.
Thank you so much for this conversation. One thought I keep having, just as a older person who is constantly asking my younger friends and my children how to use tech, is there an opportunity here for students who, somebody said just, they're adaptable. They also use this. They also, use tech, and use the very platforms that we're kind of being forced into now to use. That's our only choice. Are there opportunities to kind of tap into student strengths here?
Absolutely. And one of the conversations I had was with a group of people that are small business oriented and are having to retool to do things. And they said what they see an opportunity in education for a Kindle-like device with very simple platforms that deliver some of the things that we want to deliver in a hybrid world. And so there are 26 companies and some fairly deep pockets moving around that to try to develop something. And they've listened to parents and students that have been frustrated with the complexity of the technology we've asked kids to access. But we've asked them to access that technology that existed in the online education world only because that's what existed. It wasn't developed by teachers for kids and families and parents to navigate. And so they want a much more a much more common user interface for a lot of the entry into some of these online platforms. So people are talking that have been competitors for decades. And so they're finally starting to have those conversations. And I know that Apple is in on it too.
I know from my own class, the extra time that kids have, what they're creating and publishing for themselves right now is incredible. And they weren't allowed to because our district blocked YouTube. So there was a ton of great content on there they couldn't access. Now they're accessing it. They're creating their own content. They're sharing it with one another. And so I think this is a tremendous opportunity for students to demonstrate exactly what they're capable of, and in many ways how kind of the industrial 9-to-5 model of education has been holding them back for so long. Kind of liberate their time and their energy, let them run at their own pace, make sure the supports exist for the students that need it. And, we could easily find ourselves in a very different mode of education, a very personalized mode of education than we've experienced before. And so if we can capitalize on the moment and not, try to bring aspects of the industrial classroom into distance learning.
One of the more powerful things is that parents are realizing that there are teachable moments and that they're partners in this effort to instruct their kids in math and reading and science and language arts. And some of the more powerful lessons have been from parents who were teaching their kids how to cook. They were doing measurements or taking their, grocery shopping, planning a family budget. Kids are having access to some of those conversations that they never had before because the parents are searching for ways to incorporate some of the learning that they're doing in the hybrid classroom in their conversations with kids. We don't want to lose that.
And Ann, I saw your question, and I've been thinking about this for CTQ lately. There's so many amazing stories to tell, and some of them are being told on social media and through memes and whatnot. But the powerful things that teachers are doing and principals right now who are making sure they take a picture with the graduating senior wherever they can find them, and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of amazing stories to be told. Maybe not a lot of space. I think we're all maybe getting sick of the daily update on how the world's ending and the apocalypse and all that. People are starting to look for, what are the hopeful things happening? What's the good news that's going on? And public education is so ripe for picking those kinds of things out and crafting them in ways that are accessible and really exhibit, exactly what teachers stand for and what they're doing for their students and families.
A happy note is that reading is up. The public libraries are primarily online, but one lady that started little libraries in, I think it was Philadelphia, said that the churn rate of books in those little libraries is off the charts, and people are stocking them with kids' books, and those books are going home, and so a ton of reading is going on that probably wouldn't have gone on before. I know kids are engaging online and they're playing more games and things like that, but reading's way up, and that gives me a little bit of hope. And one of the parent blogs that I read talked about how teachers are realizing that not all learning goes on in the classroom, that there's some pretty powerful learning that goes on in the families, and they're accessing ways to not only access that, but support that so that the parents are coming in as partners. Now, this happens primarily in structures where there's a safe home environment for the kids. I continue to worry about the kids that are not in safe or supportive environments and worry about ways to support those. Has anybody got any stories about communities that are helping some of those kids that aren't in supportive homes?
Not exactly certain what you're looking for, Shannon. I've had kids who have
You know,
shown me they can,
go ahead.
kids who have shown me they can collaborate through playing online video games via Discord, and they all collaborate around a target that they're going to swoop down and capture. And I look at that and I think, we didn't teach them that, but they know how to communicate and collaborate. No, go left. No, you got to do this. We also have more of a traditional approach in the fact that we are sending out cards. We're putting together Verizon Pocket Hubs for next year, so kids will be able to get on. We're talking about putting routers in a small neighborhood in Cedar Rapids that are IP connected so everybody can connect with their school device. So there are some strengths out there. We're also visiting schools with, we have a food pantry, and I believe they've gone out and delivered more than 50 packages, and now we'll transition over. So I love the fact that a lot of these solutions are local. The trick will be getting the great stories to trickle up, because a lot of these teachers are pretty quiet.
You know, there's an analogy that I heard not that long ago where this guy builds houses, and he was a teacher for decades, but he said, I don't know what to fix in a house if I'm remodeling unless I kind of tear the house apart a little bit and look at the plumbing and look at the ugly parts, you know, the wiring and stuff like that. We've had a once in a lifetime opportunity to see the ugly wiring and the places where education isn't working, whether it's food delivered to kids and food service, or access to Wi-Fi, or access to technology, or access, you know, we've seen the kind of the ugly underbelly of substance abuse and in non-supportive families and homes for these kids. And it creates, you know, I could get stuck on that, or I could say this creates an opportunity for us to really rebuild it and to solve some of those problems, so that what was holding a lot of our kids back in the regular classroom as it existed couple months ago, we can fix that. I mean, that's something that the public can jump in on and say, you know what, we're going to have these little buses running around neighborhoods in larger cities that are Wi-Fi hubs. They're going to be there on a regular schedule so the kids can log in. Districts are coming up with money out of Lord knows what pocket to be able to buy iPads or laptops for kids. And communities are coming out of the woodwork to feed kids. I mean, we've got food service even in affluent Los Alamos, New Mexico is functioning on a really high level. But we've seen what needs to be fixed that wasn't really working in education. And I'm really heartened by the number of people that are willing to dig in and make it so that when school emerges from all this, it's not going to have some of the same problems, equity-wise or support-wise for fragile kids, or kids from broken home, you know, messed up situations at home. They're going to have some safety nets that are a lot more powerful, and that gives me hope.
I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and I would love to ensure that we can hear, even if you simply populate the chat box, if there are any additional ideas we haven't already touched upon where you think CTQ can help support your efforts, especially with a good bit of the compelling sort of groundwork and thinking about our present and our future that Shannon and Christopher have kind of laid before us here, particularly as we consider what is it we want to be doing in the ideal state in that phase of reinvention that we're finding ourselves in now? How do we begin to make that curve a bit steeper earlier so that we can really push on some of those areas to ensure we don't go back to the status quo in places and spaces where we know that's not the best thing for our students?
The stories are powerful. Yeah. Gabe, we absolutely can do it again. Tricia, I think it's important for us to have those stories from the how do we shut down this year and get ready for the next. I think that's a good conversation. I want to close, not close, but I want to give you one last hit at a to-do list. And one of the things that's really important, and I mentioned it at the beginning, if you haven't sent emails to your administrators, to your superintendents, to your state superintendents, to your school board members, to your state school board members, to your elected representatives, highlighting your successes or talking about your concerns as you work towards building a school that's going to work for all kids coming out of this, please do it. Because I would love for the teacher voice to be right up front in their daily in basket, so that when they form groups of people that are going to help design this from the policy perspective and from the funding perspective, they have a pool of teachers and they can say, wow, this one teacher named Yvonne was there, and I've had emails from her for 3 weeks, and I love some of her thinking. I'd love to have her at the table. So please, these are the people we want to have at the table, you teachers. It's important, more so than it ever has been before. Chris, any closing thoughts?
No, just I want to say thank you to you all for the time and conversation. Like I mentioned earlier, it was helpful for me to kind of collect thoughts and reflect on this, but certainly leaving this conversation feeling a lot more hopeful and optimistic about where we're going and who we're doing it with than I did coming in. And just reminded about why it's great to get together in these types of environments with like-minded educators to think about what's possible, and look forward to making it happen with you all soon. So would love to find ways to stay connected and to keep up to date as the months pass and things continue to evolve, and see what our influence can be collectively. So thank you guys for the time and space, and appreciate learning from all of you.
Thanks, folks.
And many, many thanks to Christopher and Shannon for leading us in an incredibly important information. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as many people indicated in the chat box, we will continue to have these conversations in some way, shape, or form. I'll need to get together with Jessica and Ann and talk about what that looks like. And in the meantime, if anything comes to mind about how CTQ can be helpful, if you're trying to get a hold of Shannon or Christopher, please feel free to tweet at us, visit our website, email me, get in contact in any way, shape, or form, and we can figure out how to move forward from here. And most importantly, thank you to you for showing up for this very important conversation. And we wish you well and safety as you move into your evening. So thank you very much, and good evening, everyone.